Hello, everybody. Ted Huntington here with another women's rights podcast interview with a fabulous author, Samantha Bryant. Today, I'm going to post beneath the interview, there'll be links to Samantha's work, links to womensrights.net. Of course, we want everybody to support our podcast. We have a Patreon page. Please, we encourage those to subscribe to that so we can continue these interviews, and it helps to support our women's rights organization. Samantha Bryant believes in love, magic, and unexplainable connections between people. Her favorite things are lonely beaches, untamed cliff tops, sunlight through the leaves of trees, summer rains, and children's laughter. Wow, she sounds like an incredible person. She has lived in many places, including rural Alaska, Kansas, Kentucky, Vermont, England, and Spain. Truly a global author. She is fierce at heart, though she doesn't look it. She does look very sweet. She would like to be Amy Tan when she grows up. I love that. Samantha writes blogs, poems, essays, and novels. Mostly she writes things that scare or worry her. She says it's cheaper than therapy. Someday, Samantha hopes to make her living solely as a writer. I know you're not alone in that pursuit. In the meantime, she also teaches middle school Spanish, which admittedly is an odd choice for money earning, especially in North Carolina. But hey, it's it's a good job. When Samantha's not writing or teaching, she enjoys time with her family, watching old movies, baking, reading, and going places. Her favorite gift is tickets to just about anything. Her books include Slay. She has numerous books out there, but some of them include Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir, Hindsight's 2020, a fantastical collection of regretful tales, and her Menopausal Superheroes collection. Welcome, Samantha Bryant. Yay.
Hey, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Okay, I want to start by knowing all about your Menopausal Superheroes. Tell us about those books.
So the title tells you a lot. It's the characters are all menopausal and they are all superheroes. The idea for this series started when I was taking a walk with my husband, and we had just finished watching one of the X-Men movies. And depending on how steeped you are in superhero, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, X-Men is largely centered around kind of a school for powered people. So most of the characters are quite young, and it's part of that whole puberty superpower connection that we see so much in superhero stuff. And since I am a bit past puberty myself, I am having more trouble connecting with those super young characters. And so I had this thought that, like, well, if hormones cause superpowers, then menopausal women should have the corner on that market. And that's kind of where the idea started. And the books themselves are what I would call dramedy, as in they're funny, but they're not all funny. Like, their purpose isn't necessarily to make you laugh, although sometimes they will. But they combine that kind of superhero crazy powers and fights kind of fun alongside exploring some of what it means to be a woman going through menopause.
And how many of your menopausal superhero books do you have?
There are 3 novels, 2 novellas, a collection of short stories, and then the newest release is this one, which collects the novellas and the short stories all in one bigger book.
Wow. How many books total have you had published?
For the ones that are just mine, there's just those 6, with a 7th one due out later in 2021. And then in anthologies, I think I have about a dozen where, my story is one along with other authors in the same book.
Wow, it's not just 6 or 7. That's a nice collection that you have. So how did you catch the writing bug? You're a Spanish teacher. So what did the writing start before the teaching? Did it happen concurrently? How did that come about?
Well, I think like a lot of writers, I've always been a reader, right? From the moment I learned to understand that those marks on the page were words and would tell me a story, I have loved stories in books in particular. And I've always been a writer. I just didn't like take it seriously and try to make it something that I could make any kind of career out of until I was much older. But like when I was a little girl, I wrote poetry. Um, I would uh, I would sell my services to other kids for candy to do things like write a Mother's Day poem for your mom and that kind of stuff. So I've always been a writer. I just for me, when I turned 42, you know how some people have crisis years, right? Like they freak out when they turn 30 or 40 or whatever it was. For me, the first time that happened to me was when I was 42, which I think is because of Douglas Adams. If you've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of the jokes in the book is that 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And so when I hit 42 and I still hadn't really finished much in the way of my writing, hadn't published anything, unless you count like just a few poems and essays here and there, I didn't have a book of my own. That's when I decided to take it seriously and to give it a real effort and start finishing and submitting and pursuing my writing life.
So how do you fit that all in? You've got a full-time job, you've got a family. I mean, how do you squeeze in the time and organize yourself to write so many books?
Mostly I'd say sheer stubbornness. Um, it did help that my children were older, right? When my children were younger and needed me in a more direct way for even things like seeing themselves through taking a bath and that kind of thing, it was much harder to get time. But once my children were older, we just kind of had a big family meeting and talked about what I wanted to be able to do, and we started to protect some time and space for me to write. But still, I only get on a school day, I get maybe an hour to two that I can spend on my writing life. And then on the weekends, maybe as many as three. And then because I'm a teacher, there's a cyclical nature to my work. And I do have 2 months a year when I'm not teaching. So during those 2 months, I tend to write my heart out. And since my youngest is now a teenager, if I start in the morning, I can get like 4 hours before they even wake up.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And then once they wake up, they might not want my company anyway.
You have like a sign in your door, writing in progress.
Yeah, mommy's writing, come in at your own risk.
So talk about your other books too, not just the menopausal superheroes. What you talk about your other books too, because you have some cool niches there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that my two niches that I've been published in so far seem like the two sides, because superhero tends to be pretty optimistic and positive and like let's make the world a better place, and horror tends to explore the dark alleys. But these are the two things I write. And I think what I like about both is that they're kind of high drama, that the big bold things happen in both of those kinds of stories. And so, and um so far I haven't written any long horror stories. Like I haven't had an idea that felt like it could be a horror novel. They're all short stories. So maybe that will change over time. But in horror stories, I think there's an escapism to them in that you can deal with all those angsty feelings about the bad things out there in the world, but on a far less realistic basis. Like of all the bad things that might happen to me today, a vampire coming into the room is quite unlikely. Right. But that makes it, but I can explore feelings of feeling like I'm in danger from strangers, or feeling like I'm being sought in a predatory timed away someplace. I can explore those feelings without it being too directly personal because I've moved it back to vampires.
And, well, from your biography, it seems like that's kind of therapeutic for you,
Definitely.
getting
Yeah.
out your fears and through your writing.
Yeah, I say half the time I find out what's really bothering me because I sit down to write something, and what the story is about tells me what was really bothering me. Even if I hadn't articulated it for myself, my subconscious knows.
So what would you say is the best part of creating your book world? And then conversely, what's the most challenging part?
So I think what I like most about creating a book world is being able to mess with the details. Even when you're setting a story and is basically what is contemporary now, a realistic kind of setting, you're still in charge of what kind of people are in the story. What kind of threats are the threats? What kind of weather do they have? There's a lot of sense of control in writing a story. And I say that even though I'm a pantser, I'm not somebody who sits down with a outline and knows where the story's going to end when I start writing it. But still, in creating the world, it's calming in that way, I think, because you can be in charge of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what's the most challenging aspect of the writing process, or during writing or after you're done with the books?
So in the writing, I think I tend to fall in love with my characters. I tend to love these imaginary friends I've created. And so that can make it hard to be mean to them, like make bad things happen to these imaginary people that I really like.
They're like your
Um,
kids.
yeah. So, and if my story's going to be any good, if anybody's going to want to read it, there's going to have to be some conflict and some challenge. It can't just all be, we walked together down the primrose path and nothing bad happened. There's no story there. So I think that's my challenge as a writer, is sometimes making myself be mean to the characters.
Well, you
And
have to
and then in
create
a
drama.
yes, exactly. And then in my writing life, I'd say my challenges are all about time management, because I do have to do it in such a small time. So being careful about what I commit to that isn't writing. Like I need to do things like this, like doing this interview show with you, and that helps gets the word out about my books and builds my career. But I won't be writing any words while I'm talking to you,
Hmm. I'd be
right?
impressed if
So,
you were.
wow, if I could do that. Yeah. So there's the time balance is always the tricky thing. Everybody's only got 24 hours each day, regardless of how you spend them, and figuring out how to balance all the different demands that come in a person's life. Because no matter, even if you're a full-time writer, there's still demands on you that have nothing to do with writing.
Right.
Even if it's just like make sure the dog is fed, there's something.
Right. So would you recommend that a new writer, somebody trying to find their way in the writing world, find those specific niches for themselves?
Do you mean in terms of what they write, or?
Right. The type
Yeah.
of content, right. So,
Well, I would say if you're looking to build a name more quickly, the smaller the niche, the easier that is to do, right? If you're trying to write kind of general fiction, it can be harder to catch the attention of the reader's eye out there in the world because so many people are writing it. But if you're writing, say, um, vampire stories set in the 1890s, that's a smaller, like, historical fiction slash vampire niche there. That's a little more specific, and you can kind of, once you've found this weird little niche, it can kind of expand out from there. And I find I'm getting more mainstream kinds of opportunities now, having kind of built my way in by going into kind of sideways and weird.
how much time do you spend building your fan base?
Well, I try to go in a normal year. Of course, last year was not normal for anyone. But in a normal year, I try to do one in-person event every month. So 12 times a year, go and do some kind of event. And those vary, like going to a full convention. I'll be going to Con Carolinas here in a couple weeks, where I talk on panels and have a booth where I sell my books and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's like doing an interview program like this. Sometimes it's participating in a festival or a book fair. One time I had a table at Menopause the musical. Like, I went to see the musical, and then during the intermission, I had a table where you could buy my books
Oh, that's
because it
great.
connected through menopause.
Right.
Yeah.
So who are
So I
you?
try to do one in-person event a month, which is about what I can handle given everything else in my life.
That's great. Yeah, that's good advice. So who are your writing heroes?
So I think if I go back the longest, I think probably Shirley Jackson is going to be my main hero. And there's a book that of hers that I tend to read about once a year called "We Have Always Lived in the Castle." It's probably her second most popular book after The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House recently took off because they made a new miniseries out of it. But I like "We Have Always Lived in the Castle." And she's just so good at taking something small and ordinary and still making it feel so large and like a cosmic sense and so tense. She's just such an atmospheric writer. And that particular book also has a an interesting narration in that the book focuses around a character who you're not sure if you can believe what her perspective is or not. She's kind of unreliable that way. And you can see the further you get in the book that her worldview is maybe skewed a little left of center. But you're still on her side, even though she's not entirely a good person. And that's, those are some tricky maneuvers to pull off as a writer. So those are things that I really admire.
So how consciously are you when you're reading other works of trying to utilize their point of view or their characterization or other aspects of those books and saying, oh, I want to incorporate that into my writing? Or do you think it's kind of a subconscious thing?
More subconscious most of the time. Although I do find that if I get to participate in book conversations, like either because I was in a book club and we all read the same book, or just you and I run into each other at an event and we've read the same book, that really helps me articulate in explaining why I like that book or why I thought it was effective. That helps me analyze and articulate why it worked. So if you're like, this book really creeped me out, like I had dreams about this book, and you're like, why? Why did that one do this and not this other book that I read? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, that you're a pantser. And of the authors that I've talked with, it seems split 50-50 with those that are very organized with their books and those that are pantsers that just let it flow. Was that a conscious decision on your part, or you just thought, this is how I want to write, and then I'll go back and edit afterwards? How did that come about?
So I think it's probably stems from writing as a child, right? You sit down to write a story, and a child doesn't usually have a very fully realized plan, right? You just, you sit down, you start writing, and you see what happens. And so after years of writing as a child and as a younger woman, that was kind of established. Although I did try, for one of my projects, I did try doing an outline, and I found that I couldn't stick to the outline. Like I'd have written out, okay, these are the main events, this is what's going to happen. And then I'd get to that part, and that is not what would happen. Or that if I did stick to the outline, it just started to feel stale. Like it felt to me like the decisions had already been made, and I was just here doing the assignments. Write the scene that does this, write the scene that does this, instead of getting that happy discovery kind of feeling where I'm writing a scene and then go, oh, that's awesome. I like surprising myself with the writing, and I can't do that with an outline.
Yeah, that's fabulous insights. Any, we're kind of getting to the conclusion of our interview. Any final pearls of wisdom for viewers?
Well, I'd say that I am a writer who started taking themselves seriously and making progress later in life. Like I said, I was 42 before I committed to any kind of regular writing practice, producing work regularly, trying to get it out there. So if you're not 22 anymore, don't let that make you think that you've missed your window. Right. That's the awesome thing about writing. Like if you wanted to be a championship tennis player, yes, you had to start that when you were young. But if you want to be a great writer, there are advantages to being older. You have some life experience. You've done more than one thing, probably, right? You haven't only had the one job. So your writing is going to be stronger. So I do see a lot of people who kind of talk themselves out of it, like, I missed my window. I should have done it when I was young. But writing is not one of those things. You can do it all the way as long as your brain creates coherent sentences.
Oh, that's great. Great pearls of wisdom.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Samantha Bryant. Again, we're going to post your links underneath the video. And I encourage everybody that watches this to support our Patreon page and support women's rights. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.